Hello there, and welcome to the Dear Dyslexic podcast series, brought to you by Rethink Dyslexia, the podcast where we're breaking barriers and doing things differently. I'm Shay Wissell, your host, and I'm so glad you can join us. I'm a fellow neurodivergent, and I'm coming from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, where I live and work. And I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to all the tribes across our beautiful country, and to all First Nations people listening today. Our podcast was born in 2017 out of a need to give a voice to the stories and perspectives of adults with dyslexia. And our voice has grown stronger year after year. We're now a globally listened to podcast with guests from all around the world. Join us for insightful conversations about living with dyslexia and other neurodivergences across all walks of life. Our special focus is on adult education, employment, social and emotional wellbeing, and entrepreneurship. We're excited to be bringing you this episode and invite you to like and follow us, or even better, why not leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. So let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Dear Dyslexic podcast series. And today I'm so excited because we're talking about a topic that's really popular in the media at the moment, and one that we don't always understand what the words mean. So I'm really excited to have Dr. Love on the show today, all the way from the US, to talk to us about the concept of intersectionality and labels. And we're going to unpack what that means, what those words mean, really, because I'm still learning and I'm definitely not an expert, but we're using that term in some of the research we're doing right now. And so I thought it would be great to have an expert on our show who could talk to us about what that all means. So thank you so much, Dr. Love, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here.
So we met through a connection of ours, Angie, who's also based in the US. So how did you and Angie come to meet through the work you both do?
Yeah, I think we're both entrepreneurial people. So I think we met in an entrepreneurial kind of group, where people were just trying to connect with other entrepreneurs. And she's such a supporter of women and women in business. And so we just kind of clicked and hit it off. And she's a wonderful business coach as well. So that was about it.
And you've had a fascinating working career. Could you share a little bit about how you ended up in research yourself?
Sure. I'm not sure how fascinating it is. Sometimes it just feels like it was hard. But really, I started off thinking I was going to be a psychologist. That was the thing. And me and my father had decided I was going to be a doctor, right? That was his thing. And that was what he knew as a good thing to be, a doctor or a lawyer. And he told me that at about 3 years old. And I said, well, that sounds good. I'm a 3-year-old. I don't know any better, right? At 40 plus trying to get that doctorate done, I'm like, oh my God, what was he talking about? But my career made a few different turns. Actually, I have my undergraduate and my master's degree is in psychology. So counseling psychology. I was still kind of going on that road. But every time I turned around, and I still love psychology, every time I turned around, I was kind of veering in and off to education more and more. And I felt like, oh, maybe I should be a teacher, and that led me to adjuncting for a little while. And so I kind of kept going along, and I said, I'm going to be a doctor in education. I'll still be a doctor. That'll make my dad happy. And so he can still call me Dr. Love. And yet I'll be, I think, where I'm supposed to be in terms of education. And I was never really that excited about research. I remember in undergrad, I was experimental psychology was my major. So those are the people who watch the little mice either run on the wheel or press a button to get the food. I hated that. And I absolutely hated the thought of it even. But when you get to a place where you're like, okay, I really want to delve into this subject and take a deeper dive, then the research becomes kind of fun, right? It's like, okay, I really want to know as much as I can about this particular topic. So I think my doctoral program really made me more so fall in love with the idea of delving deeper into a subject matter that you love. So I think that's how I kind of got started. And I really do enjoy the notion of how much can I really learn about this topic, whatever it is, and it could be very narrow or wide, but how much can I really gather and understand it and then help other people understand that?
So how did you get into the DEI space, or diversity, inclusion, equality, and now belonging?
Yes.
There's a B now as well.
Yes. Yep. Now belonging. Some people are Jedi. Some people do justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. So if you're a Star Wars fan, lots of different kind of acronyms, but at the heart of it, we really are all trying to, I think, again, educate people around these topics. For me, everywhere I turned in this kind of education piece, whether it was, I developed a first year experience course for new students, right? So first year in college. And one of the things I wanted to make sure it had was this multicultural affairs, some underpinning and strengthening of individuals who are coming to college for the first time and probably going to interact with individuals who are very different from them. Whether it's your roommate, your classmate, your peers, your professors, you're going to now have a new experience. So I found myself in all of these roles in terms of education, leaning more and more into diversity and how we are different and how that's a great thing, and how sometimes, even though it's great, we feel a little uncomfortable about it, right? Because it's like, okay, this is the unknown. This is different. And sometimes it's scary to people. And my goal, I figure, as an educator, is to help tear away some of the scariness about it, right? That, yes, that difference is something that you should talk about, that you should be excited about, and not feel as if this is something I want to stay away from. So for me, it was always really important working with also groups that were underrepresented. Very beginning of my career, I worked with international women. They were from a Japanese institution called Showa University. And I spent 7 years working with that particular group. But again, for me, I said, I've never worked with people. And again, this is the very beginning of my career. I've never worked with people of Asian, right? And they were also all women, right? So I've tried to always be a supporter of individuals who were underrepresented in whatever community they're in. That also led me to co-found an organization, African American Women in Higher Education, in New England, and an area in the United States where I lived. So I think everywhere I went, I was just really excited to make sure that I was supportive, that I was a listening ear and an educator around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And so how do you think, or how have you seen people embrace that difference? And we will get to intersectionality. Hopefully that'll lead us into that. But I think for a lot of people that are dyslexic, which is our difference, sometimes it can be really hard to embrace when it brings with it a lot of challenges. How have you seen that play out in the work that you do?
Yeah. So I think people like the notion sometimes of fitting in, right? I even tell people when they're hiring, oftentimes I would hear, well, we want somebody who's a cultural fit. And I used to tell people, let's change that vocabulary. Let's say a cultural add. So look at what you have right now and what is missing, right? Because sometimes when we hear that fit, you're like us, you look like us, you think like us, right? And so that brings in kind of this notion of, oh yeah, we just want somebody who can be a part of the team. Well, I can be a part of the team and be different. And truth be told, that's what many organizations need, and they miss it. I always tell people, whether it's research from McKinsey and Company, Deloitte, it talks about how oftentimes when you have more ethnic and racial diversity, you have higher income in your organization as compared to your other peers. It talks about how more women in leadership result in clients in new markets, right? So I think that sometimes we don't get that. You want the and, right? You actually want the difference. That's what brings the richness. That's what brings more innovative ideas. That's what brings different customers, right? That's what brings different students to your campuses, right? So I think that oftentimes we get into this, I want to fit. I don't want to be different, because we haven't learned to embrace the beauty in that difference. So, and I am going to just talk about intersectionality for a little bit. And you're never just one thing, is what I tell people, right? I'm a woman. Okay. Well, this isn't the whole of who I am, right? I could name 15 other different identities about myself. And so Kimberly Crenshaw, who is just the seminal author, and she coined the term intersectionality, it's beautiful because what she said is that you're not just one thing, but she also understood that the multiple kind of forms of identity also can bring multiple forms of discrimination, right? Impacting your day-to-day lives. So if you have, for example, sexism, okay, I'm a woman. I'm a woman of color. So now I've got to deal with racism, right? Different religious background. So it is now not just seeing someone and that they're dealing with this one kind of area of discrimination, but it's that all of this can intersect, all of this can converge for people. And therefore people, sometimes we ourselves don't understand we're dealing with multiple types of discrimination and also stereotypes. You know, you talked a little bit about labels, right? So these assumptions that we have about people, and we even get into kind of, and I won't talk about this long, but stereotype threat, right? The worry, the concern that I might actually, as a member of a particular group, affirm the stereotype that you have about me, right? And so that's a stereotype threat. So it's these layers and layers of your intersectionality, of your identity kind of converging into a place in which oftentimes people are experiencing discrimination. And that's why we need individuals like yourselves, like me, who are doing the work to help and support individuals who may go about their existence in our societies differently, right? Because we have to, because of some of those labels, because of some of those stereotypes, because of what exists. I always talk to people about race, for example. Get that up. We as human beings just said, oh, you're going to be this race, you're going to be that. We made it up. Literally, you can look at someone who is maybe looks exactly opposite, quote unquote, from me. We're very different, but we have similar DNA, right? That tells you that we can have this connectedness and this closeness, but because of the labels of race, right, that we've put on each other, now there's some level of division, right? Because of these labels that we freely have embraced. And now we're like, okay, well, if we don't want them anymore, what do we do with them? Because now they're so ingrained in our society, right? I don't know how many forms I fill out that ask me who you are, right? And these little check boxes, these labels, right? And then what do I do, going back to intersectionality, if I'm many identities, right? You want me to check a box. Well, first of all, I'm going to check more than one. Number two, the box that I want to check isn't even well defined for me. So I think that there's a lot that goes into kind of this understanding and this notion of intersectionality, and also this connection to labels, oftentimes that we give each other, that we as a society in some way, shape, or form have decided to embrace. Yeah.
Well, there's so much to unpack there, and I didn't have my notepad to take notes as you were talking.
Oh, that's okay.
No, I've got to try and retain it in my brain. It's
recording it. You can listen to the recording later.
I can. We had an early start this morning. We have a PhD research group that we facilitate. So my brain's all over the shop this morning. But can I go back first, because I love that concept of cultural fit, because we do hear that all the time. So I love your reframing of it. And see, now I had to write it down because it was different. And the term you used, cultural ad. Yeah. I love that, because even as a manager, we're always saying, oh, we want something that has a cultural fit. But what does that actually mean? Right. And yes, you're right. Then it's everyone that's the same. Rather than
and
different.
That's what you're saying, right? It's just a paradigm shift. And when we start to sometimes shift our language, then we have that paradigm shift as well, right? So we want add. So now we're looking at what doesn't exist. I remember working at an organization once, and this is just one example. And when I looked around, I didn't see anyone with a visible, I want to be clear, visible disability. And disabilities can be seen and unseen in lots of ways. Why is that? Somebody needs to notice who is missing and start asking the questions, right? Somebody needs to understand that there's a reason why we don't have more people of different genders, right? I remember I was at one organization. I was the only woman on the cabinet, and I was the only woman of color in all of the history of, I think, 183 years that had ever been on the cabinet. That's when we need to ask the questions. And I think sometimes what people are doing is they're saying, well, we just want the right people. Well, why can't the right people still be diverse? That's my question. Of course you want the right people. That's not even an argument. What is it about the right people that everybody looks alike here? And you're saying that's the right people. Why can't we expand and broaden even our pool, right? When we're managers, supervisors looking to fill positions, just broaden the pool and you have a better chance of therefore getting more diversity in every way, shape, and form. If you're always advertising in the same places, if you don't take the time out to say, I am particularly trying to make sure everyone sees this job, then you're oftentimes going to get the same people, because somebody who works for the organization is going to tell somebody they know, one of their friends, about the opening. And we start this kind of very same cycle over again versus really trying to expand and say, we really want to make sure that we are targeting folks that are different, right? And then you'll get a bigger pool and you're going to have more diversity.
At Rethink Dyslexia, we are doing things differently. As a global leader in creating inclusive environments for adults with dyslexia, our commitment is to provide individuals with opportunities to live healthier, happier, and more connected lives. Through our range of tailored services, including coaching, learning and development programs, consultancy, and training, we're helping dyslexic individuals, businesses, and organisations to better understand and support their dyslexic employees. So if you're looking for insights, inspiration, and expert advice on dyslexia and how you can provide inclusive practices and environments, then head to rethinkdyslexia.com to find out more, or book your free consultation today.
At the moment, we try to, when we go out to talk to companies, it's tapping, there's an untapped talent pool of neurodivergents, particularly dyslexics. But I wonder if the language should be, you're looking for a cultural add rather than a cultural fit. And we are the ones that can add the difference that you need. So it's all around the reframing, isn't it? We will test that at market. Come back here to see, does the cultural ad resonate differently to an untapped talent pool?
That's right. That's right. It really does. Because whenever you say add to somebody, they automatically, wait, I'm getting some. You said add, right? Most people have a very kind of a positive affect to that add, right? You're going to get something that you don't have. And most people respond to that in a very different way. And again, it helps them to now think of this as, okay, who don't I have? Right? Who do I really need that is missing here? That will bring about different ways of thinking. And therefore, take your organization, take your company, and present it to a group of individuals that otherwise wouldn't have thought about it, that otherwise wouldn't have been part of your organization or even known your organization existed. But now you've tapped into, okay, different gender, different race, neurodivergent. You've tapped into a market, and we all have a market, right? Because we all have specific needs as well. So that tapping into that is more powerful than I think organizations and managers actually realize.
Before we go back to the intersectionality, could you just talk to our audience about how you got into the DEI space? Because you started in psychology, then you went into the education sector, and now you do more coaching, but you had a portion of time, and I thought your research as well, you were all around diversity, DEI, because I always get the E confused, equality and equity mixed up.
That's okay. We need both.
We do need both, but one you get everyone's got equal, and the other one it's not quite equal, isn't it? If you think of the little picture of the people standing at the fence, people won't know what I'm talking about, and put the picture in the podcast so you know what we mean when we talk about equity and equality and the slight differences that those two words are meaning in this context.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I use that picture. Now I use another picture with the bicycles. I don't know if you've seen those.
No, I haven't seen that.
I'll send it to you because it has bicycles made for different people, right? So if somebody physically disabled wants to ride a bicycle, well, their bicycle is going to look different than the other person's bicycle. And I like that because now it also shows this physical part to the diversity that we're talking about as well. But for me, like I said, I was doing a lot of work in education. I was kind of following an ed track, a higher ed track, so to speak. So my goal was I'm going to be a dean at 30, right? You start making these goals. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, what do I have to do to get there? And I became a dean at 31. And I said, oh man, I'm still here. But even then, I was developing programs around DEI, around multicultural affairs, and different organizations call it different things. But I was still developing different kinds of program and planning. And you're right, my dissertation, I always tell people, my dissertation, everything about it was ahead of its time. It was on race-conscious affirmative action admissions policies. And, here in the States, the Supreme Court just made a major decision, almost actually a year ago, around race-conscious affirmative action in higher education. And the theoretical framework that I used in my dissertation was critical race theory. Now, here in the United States, critical race theory is like a buzzword, like, oh my gosh. And again, this was years before anybody started talking about any of this stuff. I was writing about it. I was researching it. And so that I could help people understand. And so I could understand myself what this really would mean for our society. But I just kept kind of leaning in, as they say, to that space. And I always tell people, whether it was paid or volunteer work, I was doing it, right? Because I think it's one thing, yes, we want to keep a roof over our head and food on the table, but it's also another thing to be doing some of this work, and it's just totally volunteer, right? To be doing some of this work because you understand there's not the dollars there right now. There's not the attention even on this subject matter, but I know work needs to be done here. So I spent some time doing that, and I know some of your listeners, especially who work in this kind of space, will understand that, right? That the dollars, the financing, and the support at the end of the day doesn't seem to be as strong as it could in this field, right, of DEI. So I think that for me, I was doing that work, and I also ended up, my last kind of job outside of, running my own company was as a chief diversity officer, right? And that experience was really quite wild for me. And I loved it. But at an institution, at an organization that was predominantly male, predominantly white, and here I come in as a Black woman, and it's like, okay, what's this but I was really excited about it, right? I didn't approach it, going back to what I was talking about in the beginning, I didn't approach it with a fear. And there were individuals, and I moved for the job, and there were individuals like, are you going to be okay? Like how they were scared. Well, I wasn't scared. They were almost like scared for me. Are you going to be in a safe space? And for me, I felt like, yeah, I'm going to be fine because there's a work to be done. And if nobody does it, then what happens, right? If nobody does the work, if nobody has the boldness or can put their fear aside for 2 seconds, then you still continue to have this divide, right? It's like people in different political parties, right? Sometimes people don't even want to talk to each other. Are you kidding me? It's just a conversation. But we've built up so much tension and so much fear that literally people want to stay in their proverbial corners, so to speak, which is really unhelpful for us as a country, as a society, all around. We should be able to have conversations and discussions, even if we disagree, and move forward. So for me, after that role, coaching came up because I thought to myself, I would have really benefited from a coach myself. Just someone to talk with, just someone to say, hey, this is what's going on at my organization. I don't really know how to solve it, right? I don't really know how to approach the situation. And a coach would have been something that they kind of walked me through some ideas. They could have helped me strategize. And that's what I try to do with people now. I try to help them strategize diversity, equity, and inclusion in their particular organization. And I always say every organization is different. Every organization has an organizational culture. And so you have to then design kind of your program, your diversity program, DEI program around that organization, understanding its culture, because sometimes you can use whatever the culture is of that organization to push DEI. I'll give you one quick example. I also work sometimes with faith-based organizations around DEI. Okay, well, if you've got this fundamental belief, right, of this something greater than yourself, right, of this, and you want people to be a part of this thing, of your particular faith, then let's lean into that and understand. In order to do that and get lots of people to understand about your faith, you're going to have to be more open to the types of individuals who might come to know your faith through you. So I try to use wherever people's starting point is, I guess is the best way to say it, to help them understand more and embrace more about DEI.
I feel like we need a 2-part series. I could talk to you for hours and we haven't even come back to the intersectionality framework.
I'm sorry. You can tell me to just, shut up.
No. It's fantastic because there's so many points again that I didn't write down because I was too busy listening and learning. No, please don't apologize. Because I think everything you said is so important in the space that we're trying to work in with Rethink Dyslexia around, the cultural ad and the thinking differently about how we bring people in. And I think workplaces aren't at the moment. It's so hard to see the intersectionality of things because we're so busy and there's so much already happening. And the research we've done is that managers aren't equipped to support like the dyslexic employee or the neurodivergent employee. It's just one extra add-on that they don't want. Or they don't know how, they might not, maybe they don't not want it, but that they don't know how to support it to the best of their ability. And so it becomes that fear. It's like bringing someone in that's culturally different or has a different ethnicity, that there's the fear that you were talking about of what if I do this wrong? It's like working with First Nations people. I work on a project and some of my team, they don't want to support the facilitation of yarning circles. And again, it's not that they don't want to, but they're fearful that they might say the wrong thing and they might offend our First Nations people. And so it's how do you break down that concept that I'm going to do the wrong thing, so I'm not going to try.
And that is so true. It's the fear. And sometimes when I'm doing trainings and workshops and people, I just put it out there, right? I try to put everything I know that people kind of think in their heads sometimes when they come into kind of diversity training. One is that they're going to be bored to death. And I'm like, you can forget it. You're not going to be bored. I'm going to give you a lot of stuff to do. And then the other piece about it is that I try to really acknowledge with people that you're not perfect. You are in a training to learn. So the theory that you're supposed to know exactly how to word things and exactly what to say, and you're supposed to know everything about every culture on earth, even right. So let's take off some of that pressure. But the other thing I say that I think people forget about that I really appreciate, if your desire is so much so that you don't want to offend somebody, I can appreciate that, because if you didn't care, you wouldn't care whether or not you offended them. So again, your care for your fellow, human being here is, I care. I don't want to say something wrong. I don't want to offend someone. I said, start with that, right? And in that, then I always tell people thoughtfulness in speech, right? Think about how you're going to say it, right? And it's helpful, right? Because what I want people to do is take a beat, right? Take a minute and kind of articulate it in your head first and repeat it to yourself. And that is helpful, right? Then versus, well, this just, came to my head and it came out, and it didn't come out the way I wanted it to, right? Because it happens in trainings and workshops. People get kind of concerned that they might say something. And sometimes people do say something and it impacts someone. And so one of my other things that I say in training is that we cannot excuse impact for intent. We understand your intent wasn't to say something that was hurtful, that was offensive. We still have to deal with the impact of that, right? Because you have somebody in the room or certain people in the room that have been impacted by that. So let's deal with the impact. But we understand that the intent definitely wasn't to offend. So I really do try to help people kind of set all those things up before we begin the conversation, right? So that it takes away some of the worry, some of the angst, some of the fear, and like everybody does, I statements, I read, I thought, I grew up, I believed, and I tell people oftentimes, this is a really good one. I thought I heard you say, yes. Instead of you said, and the person's like, no, that's not what I said, right? I thought I heard you say, because when you have a room of people, several people kind of saying things and lots of information coming at you, sometimes you don't same way. I mean, I've seen this a million times, and research shows this. You can have 4 or 5 people in the same room and something happens in the room and everybody gives you a little bit of a different picture of the color the person was wearing, exactly what they said, because there's so much information coming at you. So I always tell people, I statements, I thought I heard, are also good things to think about. Yeah.
I wonder if we need a second part to unpack intersectionality. What do you think? Because I feel like we've set the context really well for the DEI land, and I love your concept about, it's not all about the money. I try to tell my husband that as I do these early morning calls or late night work, and the reason sitting behind it, that why around that no one else is doing it and someone has to, because otherwise we don't see change. And I never thought of myself as going to be a change maker. But as you were talking around someone has to always step forward. So sometimes it's
that's exactly what you are.
Person.
That's exactly what. Well, it never is, right? I don't think most of us, like I said, me and my dad said, you're going to be a doctor. We didn't say change maker. We didn't say activist, right? We said doctor. But in all of that, you can still be a change maker. You can still be an activist, right? Which is exactly what you're doing. And I wish more people, in their doctoral programs, even in undergrad, understood that this education you're getting, this is so you can make the world a better place. I used to tell students whenever I had the opportunity, you should leave this institution better than you found it. So wherever it is, you should leave it better. Your mark on it should be that, oh, that person left space for me. That person started this club, this program, this thing, so that I could feel like this is home, that I fit here. So I do think that people have, this kind of notion around these things that, that's not going to be me. But that's exactly who it is. It's you. So everybody listening to the podcast, you, the person who is going to change the world, change your community, change your neighborhood.
I love that, being able to make space for the next person coming up, because that's what we're trying to do, isn't it? Whether it's trying to but make changes in society for the better, for people coming through. For us, it's, making a better space for those with dyslexia so they can be their true, authentic self and they are able to be who they want to be. So I think that's a really positive way to end our conversation. Could we have you back for an intersectionality? Because everyone will be like, what is this intersectionality? And I'm really grateful you started to unpack what it means. And I think for me, it's been such a learning to try and include it in my research and to really try to unpack what that means from a dyslexic perspective and the labels without bringing my own biases in. Because I think I could be quite biased in some of the...
And we all, right? We all have bias. I always say if you're breathing, you have bias, right? There are things in which we just have a particular frame, a particular lens around, right? For various different reasons. But what you want to know is what that bias is, right? Because sometimes it's very unconscious, implicit bias. People have maybe heard those concepts. You literally don't know it, right? So you don't know what you don't know. And then it's, of course, difficult, almost impossible to change it if you don't have any awareness of it. So I try to get people to a place, let's just be aware of what it is, right? Before you go to, okay, I need to start doing all this different. Let's just be aware. We all have bias, and our job, I think, as human beings is to identify it and then work on mitigating it so that then doesn't impede other people.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you. Hopefully you've agreed to coming back again. I've kind of thrown that second part at you, but it would be great to have a second part series because it's just such a privilege, and it's so joyous to talk to you and to listen to your wisdom and learning throughout your career as both a researcher but also in the DEI space. And we wear many hats, and so it's hard for me to stay on track with just one line of thinking because it's not just, it's multiple different areas we could talk about. But if we could have you back on the show so we could talk about intersectionality, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. And I will try not to go astray next time.
No, I think it's all really important. And I think it helps us to build a framework of understanding around when we talk about intersectionality, what does that actually mean in the workplace and in our society? So I think we needed this background conversation to then talk about the next part. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you.
If you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up to our mailing list so you can keep up to date with everything we are doing at Rethink Dyslexia. So head to rethinkdyslexia.com.au. And don't forget, if there's anything you heard today that was distressing, you can contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or Beyond Blue on 1300 22 46 36. Thanks for listening and bye for now.
Oh, yeah.